coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order. The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests.
He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial.
How can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time when I've gone near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear.
Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show?
My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something.
We both took the same model, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that.
So will it show? How can I contain this anguish and this pain? Knowing that your eyes are blinded by the light.
He is the free American, Clay Douglas. Catch the Green American weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern.
Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger wells inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon out of the sky and drop the sun.
For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. We're having a little bit of a problem here connecting with one of our stations. And maybe they'll wake up in a moment or two, in a few moments. Maybe they won't. But I'm tired of the ringing, so we'll try again with Truth Radio in just a few minutes. And my guest today, folks, is Harry Cooper. He's with Shark Hunters, and this is a worldwide organization dedicated, correct me if I'm wrong here, Harry, to the history of the U-boats, of submarine warfare.
Right.
And you've got a new book out.
Yes, sir, we do.
And you're talking about Hitler. Now, I want to clarify something real quick here. You know, folks, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I took an oath over 45 years ago, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When I saw what happened at Waco, I did a couple of things, 3 things actually. I started this radio show, I started the Free American magazine, and I started the militias around the country to do exactly that, to defend the American people against domestic enemies. And I also am on the board of directors for Timothy Bible College, the Little Red Schoolhouse, so you can educate yourself at home without paying exorbitant fees, taking out student loans, doing things like that, so you can educate yourself on history. And one of the subjects that I have touched on and hit upon many times from many different angles is World War II. Why did it happen? Whose fault? Who was at fault? The bankers fund both sides of every conflict. And what's the definition of fascism, Harry? That's exactly what our founding father, Thomas Jefferson, warned us about. If you ever allow a private bank to issue your money, the banks and the corporations that spring up around them will leave your children homeless in the land we conquered.
Yep.
That's kind of what's happening right now in America. And a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, I guess, I put up an interesting film, was something I found very, very well done. It was called The Truth That's Never Been Told. And it was a documentary about Hitler's rise to power and what happened to precipitate in about World War II. Found it very interesting. And I immediately started getting reactions. You supporting Hitler? No, I'm not supporting Hitler any more than I'm supporting the Zionists, any more than I'm supporting Israel, any more than I'm supporting Red China or the Soviet Union, who was our ally in World War II, and yet Stalin killed 60 million of his own citizens while he was killing Germans. I find that pretty troubling, and I want to know the truth. So if we can't look at both sides of history, if we don't understand what motivated Hitler, and that's why I have up on my website a link to the English version of Mein Kampf. We need to understand our enemy, and what do they say? Keep your enemies closer than your friends?
Yeah, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, yep.
So,
I used to hear that when I had a short time working for the Mafia many years ago.
yeah, I've been offered, well, Clay, you know, if you work for us, you wouldn't have any the problems you have, you know. I'm sorry, I don't work for nobody. But tell me about this here. First of all, let's talk about shark hunters.
Okay.
And how did you start this? How did you get interested in this? And what have you found out about it? It's almost amazing that we actually won the war because the Germans had the submarines before we did, didn't they?
Well, they had much better submarines at the beginning of the war, but then their technology slowed when the U.S. technology took off, and the German technology was starting to take off again at the end of the war, but it was too little too late. And let me back up a second and touch on something very briefly that you said about to start War II. You're assuming that he did. If you look at the history, up until 1918, there was no Poland. And then after World War I, the victorious Allies carved up the map, and suddenly there was Poland. But there were ethnic Germans, Volksdeutschers, who lived in what was Pomerania and East Prussia, part of Germany, and suddenly it's Poland. They had lived there for generations on top of generations. And in the last part of August 1939, more than 450,000 ethnic Germans were forcibly kicked out of Poland, taking their farms, their property, everything taken. And in those last 2 weeks of August 39, about 40,000 or 49,000 ethnic Germans were massacred in Poland by Polish officials and civilians. And so Hitler sent in the troops to protect his own people, the same way as Teddy Roosevelt sent the Marines into some of the banana republics. And then Churchill kept turning down all the peace proposals. So, okay, now that I've created hatred among half of your people for me, we'll get on to your question. Let me ask you this. Who was behind the Polish attacks on the Germans? I don't have facts to back that up, so I know where you're going with this, but I'll let you do that.
All right.
At any rate, well, yeah, we know since before Hitler ever came to power, there was a worldwide attempt to boycott all German-made goods.
Yes, sir. What full-page ad in the New York Times?
Well, lots of places.
Lots of places, yes, sir.
So, switching back to your question about how did we start. Okay. Prior to, about middle 70s. Prior to the middle 70s, I believed all the old stories. Hitler was a horrible man. The Germans were all murderers. They hated God, prayed to Hitler, machine gun people in the water for sport. I was a kid during the war years, so we got all those stories. And I really didn't give a damn one way or the other. I was a upcoming executive in my old hometown, Chicago, and also in the first half of the 1970s, I was driving the super speedways. I raced against A.J. Foyt, Bobby Unser, Gordy John Cock, Al Unser, etc. I spent my Sundays at 190 miles an hour running around on the high banks. So World War II, German submarines were of no interest. Well, my last race, the 1976 Texas 500, I was in the lead pack with A.J. Foyt, Bobby Unser, Al Unser, Johnny Rutherford, Gordy John Cock, etc. Blew the engine in my race car. Coming home to Chicago, blew the engine in my truck. Got back to Chicago, found out that my boss had quit, and a guy I couldn't get along with was now my new boss. So I just said, that's the end of that story. I just handed in all my keys, sold all my race car stuff, sold my trucks, my cars, sold my house, sold everything I owned, bought a 30-foot sailing yacht, put an ad in it in Cruising Boating magazine for female crew companions. Remember, this was before the days of age. And I got over 200 replies. I left Chicago with a blonde, a brunette, and a redhead that were 24, and 25 years old, and I was 40. We went to live in the Bahamas, and the best thing about that time, all kidding aside, there was no pressure. No pressure, go anywhere to do anything, no boss leaning over your shoulder, no customers yelling at you, etc. And stress kills you. So, we came across this one island that had been a working plantation during the war years. The ruins of the mansion are on a hilltop, and the ruins of the radio shack and a barracks building were overgrown by the vegetation. I chopped through it. I took all the photos. And the old caretaker told me that the owner of the island, who was a Brit, but who hated the crown, so they were taxing him to death, he was supplying fresh water and food to German U-boats. Now, we never did find out if that was true or not, but my first reaction, of course, was those dirty Nazis. That's what we were told. But I put it in the back of my head because I had more important things like Debbie, Lynette, and Karen. And eventually, one day, I looked at my wallet and I had $5. That's all I had left in my name. So I sailed back to Florida, put my boat in a marina, hitchhiked home to Chicago, roofed a room for my sister, went back to work as vice president of a pretty fair-sized company, and I started to research the U-boaters. And I found out they were not raving Nazis or any Nazi of any kind because they were forbidden to join any political organization. Much as the propaganda said they machine gun people in the water all the time, there was only one instance that was proven, and it turned out this guy was trying to sink all the crates that were floating so that the patrol planes in the morning wouldn't know there was a U-boat out there, and the bullets went through and killed some guys hiding on the other side of the crates. In the early stages of the war, before the tide of war swung, the U-boats frequently would help the guys in the lifeboats after they sank the ship. One of our members, we've got thousands of members in 76 countries. One of our members was a sea captain, American sea captain in the war, 1942-43, I think it was. He got his ship sunk in the North Atlantic, and they were all in the lifeboats, and the U-boat surfaced, came alongside his boat, and the U-boat skipper yelled down if he asked if he needed any medical supplies. And he yelled back, no, everyone was fine. So the U-boat skipper sent over a compass and told him which direction to steer to get to land quickly And then he said, I'd like to give you some fresh water, but our desalinator's down, so can you take a couple cases of beer instead? So these guys had the highest level of honor. The officers in training had a 24-point honor code. The enlisted men had a 10-point honor code. They were not allowed to steal or to rape or anything like that, or they'd wind up getting shot by their own court-martial. So I looked at the statistics. The United States Navy submarine force had the worst casualty rate of any of the American military forces. 1 man out of 7 was killed. That's a horrible rate. But on the German side, 1 out of 7 came home. We never found any reports of desertion. They all stood in line. They served their country, just like our guys served our country. And the poor guy in uniform was just kind of, well, I'm not going any farther with that, but on both the American side and the German side, for the most part, these were honorable guys. And we have conventions every year, and unfortunately so many of the veterans are gone, but they'd get together and they'd become friends, guys who were shooting at each other. As a matter of fact, our first convention, 1987 in Key Largo, Florida, which I did in February of 87 because I lived in Chicago at the time and I needed an excuse to get out of the cold weather. On my left side was a guy named Ray Lankheim. We were at the bar. I used to drink in those days, and I was trying to set a new record, I think, for pina coladas that night. And the guy on my left, Ray Lankheim, was a gunner on an American anti-submarine ship. The guy on my right was Hans-Georg Hess, the youngest commander of the submarine in the war. He was just barely 21 years old, and they gave him command of a submarine, told him, go on out and die for your country. He came back from 5 war patrols, sank a bunch of ships. So these two guys were talking back and forth across my face, and well, what was your area of patrol? Well, that was my area. So when were your, what was the dates of your patrol then? Well, that's when I was there. And then Hess, the skipper of U-995, he said, the number on your destroyer was such and such. And Ray Lankheim said, yeah, how did you know that? And Hess said, well, on such and such date, I fired 2 torpedoes at your ship, so somebody must have seen me because your ship turned and I missed you. And Ray says, he got a big smile. He says, yeah, I remember that. And he named the lookout, and he got a little bit arrogant. He says, so you missed us, Captain. What do you think about that? And Hess slammed his big old fist down on the bar, and he says, well, I'm glad we missed. We have more time for beer now. And the two men became good friends.
By the way, I can really relate to that, Harry, because I've drank in all the same bars as Hemingway and the Bahamas and the Keys.
You must have been to the Complete Angler Saloon there.
Absolutely. Wrote about that in my book, One Bloody Alabaster. I wrote about the Complete Angler. My character was a temporary bouncer at the Complete Angler in one of my books. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, I haven't been back there ever since I stopped. Well, my new wife, I got married a few years after I came back, and I took her to the Bahamas a few times, but we flew over, stayed in the hotel, and that was it, and I sold my boat. I just couldn't afford to keep it anymore once Obama got in. I've been Obamanized and lost my boat, but that's another whole story. But I go to Germany all the time, sometimes as much as 5 times a year, and those people over there are just so incredibly decent. And when you shake hands with a German and say, this is what I'll do, and he says, this is what I'll do, you can take that to the bank because they're not going to break their word.
My whole family, the Von Beers and the Wolfs, came from Germany, came here, came up to Ranger, Texas, and, so, yes, sir, I agree with that 100%.
And that's the way it should be. So we go over, we bring people over who want to go on these history tours. We're going again in September for 2 weeks. We go every September. We go to Germany and Austria. And the 3rd Sunday in September, we are always guests of honor at a memorial, the Ulrichsberg for vets, where they remember everyone who fell in battle, no matter what uniform they were wearing. And, we meet all the old veterans. There are more and more empty seats now, but we visit for 3-4 days with hundreds and hundreds of veterans, mostly from either the Waffen-SS, which were the toughest troops of World War II, or with the regular Army, some from the Air Force, and just a handful from the U-boats. But they're always happy to see the Americans come over, and anybody else who wants to come.
Let me take you aside. Let me do a little sidetrack here for just a moment.
Okay.
Because I put up links up on my Facebook site, which is Free American 69, about what the Germans are doing with solar. They're not building nuclear power plants. They're putting solar on the roof of every farmhouse, every out there. And I've been telling people here in the United States, that anytime a communist regime takes over, a tyrannical regime takes over, they want to go after the farmers first, intelligentsia next, and the veterans and law enforcement are still loyal to the old regime. That'd be those of us who consider ourselves oath keepers, not the organization simply took an oath. Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, Constitution.
Yep. Right.
And I've said the best way we can fight back right now is to restore our liberty villages that we spread across this country. I mean, everywhere you went across America, 100 years ago, there was a farm, there was a windmill, and they were self-sufficient. Now, with the technology we've got today, and this is what I'm talking about, Germany, they're putting solar on every home. They've got fields of solar mirrors. They're gathering it. They're even generating steam from the heat of the solar here in America, but in Germany especially, they have really done that, and I really admire that. Is that true?
I'm seeing more and more rooftop solar panels whenever I go over there. I was just over there a few months ago, and I'm going again in a few months, and I'm seeing more and more rooftop solar panels, and that's great. The father of my daughter's boyfriend, fiance, whatever you call him, built his own house, and he built a total rooftop solar panel, but also a windmill. And I remember when I was a kid, I spent summers and long vacation spread like Christmas, etc., on my granddad's farm in southwestern Michigan, and he had a big windmill up there too. So if the power ever went out, they just switched over. And yeah, that's the way America was, self-sufficient. Now we can't be self-sufficient anymore. We have to depend on the government to do everything for us, and that, chipping away at not only your liberty, but it's chipping away at your whatever the heck that word is.
Self-sufficiency.
That's the word I'm looking for. Geez, I'm a writer and I can't come up with a word. That's a hell of a note, isn't it?
It happens. It's this is the independence. This is what independence is. It's being totally self-sufficient, and if you grow your own food, if you grow food in the backyard, not grass, and you put solar on your roof, then you don't really need the government or the banks for anything.
Yeah, true. With the exception of a car I bought for my wife about 10 years ago, I haven't financed a car in forever. And the same when I was driving race cars. I either paid cash for it or I did without. I remember one of my buddies there, his wife had to sell her gold watch to buy his tires for a race, and another guy needed money for a fresh engine. They're expensive. They were $30,000 back in those days. The guy took a second mortgage on his house to pay for his engine, and he blew up the engine halfway through the race, but that second mortgage was still there. So if you, I had to finance my house. Nobody's got that kind of money laying around, but if you can't afford to write a check for something, you really don't need it.
Well, I don't even have a car. I prefer riding a Harley, so.
Well, I used to ride when I was younger too, but here in this county in Florida, we've got the oldest average age people in the whole state, which also has the oldest average age. And, you know, the average person here is 70 or 80 years old. They can't even see the hood ornament on their car, let alone a guy on a bike. So
I have ridden there. I lived in Miami for 8 years. My books are all centered in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, the Keys, and the Bahamas.
Well, that's very nice areas. We're way up here, about 80 miles north of
hold
Tampa.
on just a second.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Richard Palmquist. I have been trying to get on Truth Radio for the first 10 minutes of the show. And
Yes, we have a power failure. I'm in the process of rebooting now. In 5 minutes, try again and you'll be on.
all right, sir, I will do that. Thank you very much. All right,
Yeah.
Larry, that's our problems. Talking about power, there we go.
Yeah, you think it was really an accident, hey?
Well, it's hard to tell with my show. It's hard to tell with my show. I get that kind of thing a lot here when I have especially an interesting guest. The power goes down, the internet goes out, things like that happen.
Amazing, isn't it?
Wait, you know, I gotta ask you, you know,
Sure.
just like I've been attacked over putting this documentary. I didn't make it, but I put this documentary, and I had people that I thought were friends. What, you support Hitler? No, I'm not supporting no one. I'm educating you. I'm giving you the information. That's what we're doing this show for. We're not trying to promote anything other. The only thing I promote is the rights of the individual. It's spelled out in our Bill of Rights.
I get the same type of, well, I used to, not so much anymore, but I used to get, are you a Nazi? They ask me if I'm a Nazi. And I throw it back at them and I say, well, describe a Nazi. What is a Nazi? Oh, Jesus, they're lost. They have no idea. And they stumble and stammer, and then they say, well, you got to be German. I said, well, that's me. My Coopers all came from England, and my grandma on my mom's side came from England, and my granddad came from Ireland, so I'm Irish-English, and the best part of me is Irish, so I guess I can't qualify as a Nazi.
and you were demonized.
And I said, I've never met any man that I love. You know, for women, okay, it's a different story, but I don't love any man, and I'm not German, so... As a matter of fact, I'm more Republican than anything else, and of course that always sets them off too. Usually people who ask a question like that really don't want an answer, they want a confrontation.
You know, this is the oldest maxim in warfare. Divide and conquer.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, you're a Republican? Well, I'm a Democrat. You're a liberal? Well, I'm a conservative.
Yeah.
And I tell people, Harry, I tell people, I don't care who your grandmother slept with. You Irish were demonized more than Germans at the turn of the century.
Yeah, I know. But hey, incidentally, pass on to your listeners if they want to click on www.sharkhunters.com. Oh, but we're ringing again.
We have that now. Now we're up on Truth Radio. Sorry we were late, folks. Blame it on the power companies.
Clay,
yes, sir.
We're still in the process of booting.
All right.
Another 5 minutes.
All right, goodbye.
Does that mean we're all off the air now? Or
No, just one station. We're still broadcasting on Blog Talk Radio. We're broadcasting on YouTube. We're broadcasting on Crusade. The power went out in Pomo, California.
Gotcha.
That's all.
So anyhow, if people can go to www.sharkhunters.com and click on previous tours, you'll see the secret places I've been to in Argentina and the island off of Brazil while I was putting everything together for this book about Hitler in Argentina.
All right. And by the way, that on freeamerican.com, right, this show is linked under your name, and right below that is the link to sharkhunters.com.
Oh, super! Thank you.
So I got the email that you put out telling people that you would be on my show today. I appreciate that. And
let's hope we can swell your listeners by a few thousand.
Yes, sir. I hope so. I hope so. You know, it's
also your members can send me an email at sharkhunters@earthlink.net. Say they heard this show and say they want a copy of the current copy of our magazine. We publish a magazine every month on the history of the U-boats and also on the spook stuff going on in Argentina. Just say they want a complimentary copy. We'll send them the current issue of the magazine, no charge, and they're going to fall in love with it.
Good. I put out a magazine every month. Try to. I'm a little behind this month because my computers got hacked. They tried to get into my bank accounts. They tried to get into a lot of things like that. And I think it's because, you know, I don't know. I don't know. I've often wondered why they would go after an old biker from Texas so hard, you know. I'm not a member of any organization. I don't you know, I'm certainly not a Republican or a Democrat. I consider them two wings of the same bird, and that bird's a global vulture. It ain't an eagle.
Well, what you might want to consider, you know, if the shit hits the fan and you can start a United States government in exile down in Argentina, your Yankee dollar pack's a real wallop down there. It's a beautiful country. I'm taking another group down there in January also, so if anybody wants information on that, they can sharkhunters@earthlink.net.
Who's living in the old Hitler mansion there?
Nobody. Nobody lived in it before or after. It was built by Mercedes money because Mercedes of Argentina is a huge corporation. They got a factory that stretches a couple of square miles down there, which incidentally is where Eichmann was working, which is why they were able to catch him so easily. He was not wealthy. He was not protected by the Peronista government. And so he would ride 3 hours each way on a bus every day to work and back. And he had no money, so that's why they were able to snatch him. But I digress now. But the house was built with Mercedes money, allegedly for executives of the Mercedes company down there in Argentina, but that was built at the end of the war, and it was pretty obviously built for Hitler because he and Eva Braun moved in there in 45 and they lived there until 1955, when the area was discovered as a tourist attraction because you got a huge big freshwater lake, and the Andes are right there for skiing in the winter.
Yeah.
We went there. I went there my first time in 2008, and I flew out to this little town, San Carlos de Bariloche, with one of my Argentine buddies, and we got off the airplane, and you think you were in Munich or in Bavaria because all the architecture in that little town was German and Swiss, right at the foothills of the Andes. So that evening for dinner, he and I and another guy, who was also a researcher, a damn good one in South America, we went to dinner at a very nice little, it looked like a gas tuba if you're familiar with German technology with words. And we were met at the door by the owner, an older guy, 75, 80 years old, stood about 6'2", I guess, blue eyes, blonde hair, not your typical gaucho. And he couldn't speak English. I don't speak Spanish. So he was describing the menu to my buddies in Spanish. They were translating and describing to me in English, and it just wasn't working. So on a hunch, I said, "Look at mine here. Here's my sign of spider card that English is writing. Please, sir, I'd like an English menu." Bingo, without batting an eye, I get back, "Oh, my Freund haben Sie nicht?" My friend, we don't have one. So we talked for about 2 minutes in German, and I don't know if he realized he switched languages, but then I asked him in German, I said, "You speak good German, why?" "Oh, ich bin Schweizer. I'm Swiss." "Yeah, sure you are." So anyhow, we were eating some really great Argentine steak. They got great food down there because it's not injected with hormones. And he was playing a Schiffer clavier, which is like an accordion only with no keys, just buttons on both sides. And his little gaucho buddy was playing a guitar, and they were singing Argentine songs, and it was wonderful. So I walked over to him, and I asked if he could play the Matrosenlied, the sailor song, which the U-boaters were always singing when they put out to sea in the war. Nope, sorry, don't know that one. Okay, fine. Back to my seat. Me and my buddies are still eating some great steak. And suddenly we hear, "Point of Olden, beer I sing," and he went through the whole Matrosenlied. Then he went through the entire Panzerlied, the song of the armored divisions. And he got done and smiled at me, and I gave him a thumbs up. He stood up, snapped his heels together, and stuck his right arm out. So I've met so many people down there who either were military of the Third Reich or children of the Reich. We were up in Córdoba province the next year, in the little town where all the Graf Spee sailors were forcibly resettled after the Graf Spee blew it up. And I learned that if I try to speak German, I can get along. So I went into this little souvenir shop to buy something for my wife and children, and the guy didn't speak English, of course, so I asked him in German if he could speak German. Oh, yes, all excited. "Oh, momentito, por favor, momentito, senor." Then he's dialing the phone like a madman, and he's babbling away in Spanish, and he hangs up and says, "Momentito, momentito," and about that, 2 minutes later, this good-looking young kid, about 28 years old, 6 foot tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, comes walking in, and we started talking in German. He helped me get what I needed for my wife and children, and then we got to talking. His grandfather was a lieutenant general in the Waffen-SS. He was an adjutant to Kurt Panzermeier, the commander of one of the SS divisions, and they were all over the place down there. We were on our way to another place, a hotel, a very interesting hotel. It was built in the closing moments of the war. This is up in Córdoba province. And remember, these places were so far out in the boonies during the war years, it was impossible to get there. This place is like 400 miles north or west of Buenos Aires, and could have been on the dark side of the moon back then. And this hotel was built in the closing moments of the war. It had things that almost nobody saw in a hotel. It had elevators, but it also had air conditioning in 1945, and it had a plastic surgery clinic. So, yeah, and it was built right on the shore of a beautiful salt lake in northwestern Argentina. And, it also, I forgot, it also had a 60-meter high lookout tower. You gotta wonder, why do you need a lookout tower for a resort? And you can fill in the blanks yourself. So then, for some reason, some years later, the lake suddenly rose and rose and rose, and the entire first floor was flooded all the way to the ceiling. And it was that way for some years. Then the lake receded, and the hotel is no longer underwater, but it's a total shambles, and it's shut off, except for people like me who know how to pick locks. We went inside and took a lot of pictures. That's all we took was pictures. We never touched anything. But on our way there, we had to drive 3 hours across the Pampas. And believe me, it's like driving through Indiana. It's flat. Ain't a darn thing to see. We ran into some rain. We needed windshield wipers for the car. We came to a wide spot in the road where they had a huge building that was an auto parts store. It was a repair shop. It was a gas station. It was a restaurant. And living quarters upstairs. We stopped to buy wiper blades, and we were having snacks at the snack bar. And these little kids all come running by. They were about 4 or 5 years old, all light-skinned, blue eyes, blonde hair, and their light-skinned, blue-eyed, blonde-haired mother comes chasing after them, yelling in Spanish. It didn't seem normal, but that's what you find there. But if you speak German, you can get along in most of those little towns.
I have friends like David von Kleist. David Rodell was the name that he used. he moved down to Argentina simply because he just couldn't stand what was going on here in America anymore.
Yeah.
And Argentina's already gone through that, haven't they? They went through a period where they were pretty much raked over the coals.
Yeah, they went into the financial bucket. At the beginning of the 20th century, they were as advanced, if not more advanced, than the United States, and they were much better off. But then, during the war years, they were very pro-German, and the U.S. especially was trying to pressure them, as well as all the other South American countries, into declaring war against Germany. Argentina especially, though, because we knew that U-boats were coming and going into a little place called Caleta de los Loros, Parrot Cove, and bringing spies and equipment in and valuables in, money, gold, whatever. And they had a huge spy ring down there. We're covering, I can't very well cover 30 years of research in a 2-hour radio program, but U.S. wanted it shut down. So finally, 2 weeks before Germany surrendered, the Argentine government declared war against Germany on paper, but let Germany know, hey, they're only doing it to keep the U.S. off their back. Then, after war was over, or just in the closing moment, there was Operation Valkyrie, not the one where they tried to blow up Hitler with Tom Cruise, but this was Operation Valkyrie the second, and also Operation Feuerland, where 4 big long-range submarines came down there with 40 tons of gold, plus whatever else. And when Martin Bormann arrived, he had bunches of money and all the account numbers for the Swiss banks, and also we think maybe Uruguayan banks, because Uruguay has much tighter banking secrecy than even Switzerland. So anyhow, he came down there in 1945, got to be buddies with Juan Perón. At that time, Juan Perón was a colonel with no money and no property. 2 years later, Juan Perón was General Juan Perón with a ton of money, a lot of property, and he became president of Argentina. And he and Bormann were opening bank accounts all over the place. So when I was down there, I've been down there 4 times, but this last time was just this past January, really stitched it all together. We had evidence that Martin Bormann lived in the Plaza Hotel for 2 years after the war was over, with 2 young women, so that gives them extra points in my book. But I went waltzing into the Plaza Hotel and found the lady in charge. Can't remember her name, but it's in my book. And I introduced myself. She was a very nice lady. She and I told her that I was researching to finalize this book, which has been in preparation for a long time. And I said, and I'm here because we have reason to believe that Martin Bormann lived in this hotel after the war. Without batting an eye, she said, yeah, in room 740, the presidential suite. I said, what? You knew about it? She says, sure, he lived there for 2 years. We all knew that. And so whenever I'd be asking anybody about this history, and they'd ask, why am I doing this? And I tell them I'm trying to prove Hitler lived here after the war. They looked at me like I had 3 heads. They all said, what's the big secret? We knew he lived here. I talked to a lady whose husband was in the Luftwaffe. She knew it. She knew some of the SS guys that were living down there. Like I say, the list goes on and on. It started out 1985. We had a new member joined us named Don Angel Alcazar de Velasco, living in Spain, but he was working for the Axis as an Abwehr agent, and then he went into the Sicherheitsdienst of the SS, which is their secret service, and we got to be friends through the letters and the fax. There was no such thing as email back in them days, or the internet. And he sent me a 114-page long, typewritten, single-spaced letter in which he described his activities for the German Secret Service, including he was stationed in the Führer bunker the last 3 months of the war, and one of his duties was to hand Hitler a daily report on certain agents in certain areas. So he knew he had a hello relationship with Hitler, formal but daily. Then he sent me this letter, and in the letter he said he had seen Hitler forcibly drugged under orders of Martin Bormann, and he and Eva Braun removed from the bunker. And then in 1952, he was still working for the Reich. He was stationed by then in Mexico City. He had helped Martin Bormann get out to Argentina. But he was told in 1952 to get on a plane and go here, there, etc. And then he got on a private plane, and they took him down to, he said, Antarctica. I know there's lots of theories, but I haven't seen any proof. And the way he described the compound is exactly the way this place looked like in Bariloche. And he said he sat down and had a meeting with Adolf Hitler in 1952.
In Antarctica or Argentina?
He said Antarctica. I still am having trouble believing that, but because I know Hitler was in Argentina, and I know there are many, many stories about Antarctica, but we've heard them all, but we haven't found one shred of evidence. And without evidence, all you got is a theory. So anyhow, we had another member come visit us in 1988, a guy, Captain Robert Thew, who was United States Navy his whole career. He was naval intelligence. When he retired as a captain from the Navy, he went to work for the NSA, which we know means no such agency. And he was visiting in my house, apartment at that time. And I asked him if he had ever heard of Don Angel. Oh, yep. He said, we knew him. We knew he was an agent for the Germans. And I said, well, this guy must be some kind of a nut. I said, he wrote me a letter, and in that letter he told me that he saw Hitler removed from the bunker, and he met with Hitler in 1952. I said, everybody knows Hitler committed suicide the end of April 1945. And just as calmly as if he was asking for another cup of coffee, he says, no, he didn't. We know Hitler didn't commit suicide. I said, who's we? And he said, the intelligence community. We knew he got away. So then we checked with a German secret agent we know who we're very good friends with, and he confirmed that Don Angel was who he said he was. So then we started to get serious. We ran that story as a series in our magazine way back in the late 1980s. And then we published this book the first time around in 2006. And now all of a sudden comes a couple other authors who allegedly have made this breakthrough, and they've got a book out about Hitler living in Argentina. And a lot of it reads a lot like chunks out of my book. But what can you say?
Now let me ask you a couple. I've got some people in my chat room here that are saying they tried to tell us Hitler's health was so bad he wouldn't even made the subride, let alone survive into his 80s. And they also said, was it true he was a drug addict?
Well, it's always nice to say bad things about people.
Yes, sir.
That's another rule of making somebody look bad. Just invent all sorts of stories. I don't know if he was a drug addict or not, but we know Goering was, the Air Force guy. But why was he? He didn't hang out on the local corner trying to buy drugs. He was a fighter ace in World War I, and he wound up getting shot in the Gananis, if you understand my meaning.
Yes, sir.
And then during the Beer Hall Putsch of 1923, he took 11 more bullets in the groin area. So he was kind of an instant eunuch, and he was in a lot of pain, so he took morphine. Was Hitler a drug addict? Who knows? I wouldn't put a lot of faith in character assassination of anybody unless somebody can show hardcore proof. Beyond that is nothing but fantasy and theory. We've heard
Well, that's a pretty good description of the whole history. The victors write the history, and as far as I can tell, it was the communists that won World War II, because we still got them. Every plank on the Communist Manifesto is intact in America today, but they also, you know, the deception is here. They want to try to blame it on the Nazis. If you're Alex Jones, the Nazis are coming, you know. The same way they did the Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. Bullshit. The Russians weren't our enemy. Russian people weren't our enemy. It was the governments that were our enemy.
Well, let me tell you a little about that. I am an honorary Russian submarine officer. And when I went to, when the heck was this? 1991. All of a sudden, my fax machine come on, tickety, tickety, tick. And I look, and here's it's a message from some guy in Moscow inviting me to come over for 2 weeks. They would pay for everything except my air. Okay. So I fly over, and I went, what the hell's going on? And this guy met me. I found out later he was chief of intelligence for the Soviet Navy. So among my various places I went, I had a round table meeting with about a dozen admirals. The Russians love round tables. Even if they're square, they call them a round table. But this one was round. And I was standing, all the admirals were sitting, and each one in turn was asking me a submarine history-related question. And every time, and Anatoly, my friend who was the intelligence chief, would translate. And the whole time, this guy that had big mutton chop sideburns straight across the table from me, he was just staring daggers at me with his ice blue eyes. And when it came his turn to ask a question, instead of asking a submarine history related question, he asked, "Why are you here?" And God bless him, it was the best question anybody could have asked. And you haven't known me for long, but I'm a very direct guy. I pointed at him and I said, "I was told that you are my enemy." He got all stiff, sat up in his chair straight, and I pointed at him again. I said, "But you were told that I am your enemy." And he grudgingly nodded. And I said, "But I look at you, I don't see an enemy. I see a man like myself who wants to see his family grow up in peace without war." And all of a sudden, like somebody threw a switch, they're all on their feet, they're all smiling, they all come over. I still can't get used to being kissed on the neck by another man, but they got to embrace you and kiss you on the neck. They were taking off their medals off their uniforms and pinning them on my suit coat. And that's what we found between the Germans, the Americans, the Russians. They weren't different, they just wore different uniforms.
That's right, and they, you know, it's, everything else is propaganda, everything else is trying to inflame you to go out and kill somebody else that shouldn't be our enemies. We all ought to be working together here against the bankers. The bankers' creed is to fund both sides of every conflict.
Yeah, they're doing a good job, aren't they?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, they are. You know, it's kind of like somebody, McCarthy said something about the communists being stupid, and the James Forrestal, who they threw out of a 13th floor of the Bethesda Naval Hospital, probably for saying this, said, "No, consistency is not the mark of stupidity. If they were just stupid, occasionally they'd make a mistake in our favor."
Yeah, right. No, you can't write off any enemy as stupid, even though you're told that they're stupid. During World War II, our soldiers were told that the Japanese would not make good enemies. We could beat them easily because they got squinty eyes and they couldn't shoot straight. Well, that didn't work out. And I remember as an 18-year-old punk right out of high school, I went and joined the Air Force because I wanted to kill Russians, because that's what we were told to do. I really wanted to kill Russians. They told me I couldn't because we weren't at war. So I did my 4 years. I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and I passed all the criteria, except they had so many pilots left over from World War II. In Korea, they had shut down air cadets. They told me I could be an officer, but never a fighter pilot. So I said, well, adios. So I got out. And then, like I say, with shark hunters now, I find, and even up to the very top, during my first meeting in Moscow, and several times thereafter, I met, well, the first time I met and became friends with Vladimir Chernyavin, the 5-star Admiral, Supreme Commander of the Soviet Navy, and I got to be friends. So, what kind of enemy is that, you know?
You know, there are parallels that I see. I mean, I've been talking about this for 20 years, and I see a lot of parallels between what Stalin did. He murdered 60 million of his own people.
Yeah, what a fun guy.
Yeah, and I actually believe if you took everything into consideration, they may have killed more Americans here, now, this century, than they did Russians.
I don't know about that.
Well, I mean,
I will tell you, when I went the first time in 1991 to Moscow, I got a special tour through the Red Army Museum, and there was this one wall that was just covered with 5x7 photos of generals and field marshals and admirals, hundreds of them, and my guide pointed to 6 of them and said, these men were not executed in the Stalin purges. I said, you mean all the others? He says, they were all executed under Stalin's orders. So, Jesus, it didn't pay to be an overachiever with Uncle Joe. And the only guy that got away with it was Zhukov. He became the superhero, and at the victory celebration in Red Square, Stalin was standing, you know, up at on that little podium, and Zhukov comes riding in on his prancing white horse, and the people went crazy. They loved Zhukov, but Stalin didn't dare have him whacked because the people loved him so much, so he promoted him to a post out in nowhere, and nobody ever saw him again. They just promoted him into a backwater and let him live out his life.
Well, there you made a key statement there. I want people to understand that. This murderer of 60 million of his own people, and how many Germans did he kill? How many? They didn't just cut loose the German prisoners of war, did they?
No, for the most part. Well, if they were SS, they rarely made it into a prisoner camp because they were usually shot on sight. Bomber crews also, when they came down on the parachute, if they were bomber crews, they usually got shot on sight. And after the end of the war, SS guys were pretty well used for target practice. And of course, you're familiar with the 3-day rampage of the Soviets, unstopped rape, pillage, and killing of civilian men weeks after the war ended. But they had this guy, geez, I can't even remember his name. He was a journalist in Moscow. He was telling, on the radio, he was telling the Soviet troops it's their right to kill Germans, and that they should rape all the German women and break their spirit. And German women were committing suicide by the thousands in that area, because it wasn't just the good-looking Russian soldiers. Of course, women don't want to be raped even by a good-looking guy, but it was also the syphilis-loaded Mongolian troops that were coming in there. So the winner writes the rules. The winner writes you know, he's got control of everything. And when a country loses, no matter whether it's Germany today or the Belavians back during the Roman days, if you lose the war, you lose everything. Your women are nothing but chattel. The men are target practice. And let's not forget the death camps or the starvation camps. Have you ever heard about those?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And we have them here. They're called FEMA camps. I've got a film out called The True Face of FEMA. I filmed the first Homeland Security meeting, and you know, it's frightening. In case of a atomic attack, a single earthquake of significant magnitude, say along the New Madrid fault line, or a single case of smallpox in a major metropolitan area, we'll need 400,000 well-armed, well-trained, organized, disciplined troops to control the American people, because some of them won't follow orders. They just won't follow orders.
Yeah,
you mean some of us won't line up on the Kmart parking lot to get a vaccination for a disease that's been eradicated in this country for 100 years, but it'll only give you a mild dose of that disease.
Yeah. Well, most people aren't familiar with the starvation camps, and when they start raving about how horrible was Hitler, etc., and I tell them, well, there was a general, and under his orders, over 1.1 million prisoners of war were deliberately starved to death. They had to sleep on the ground because there were no barracks buildings. They had no buildings of any kind. They were food was withheld, water was withheld, and over 1.1 million people, prisoners, starved to death. And I asked them, well, what do you think should happen to that general? Oh, well, shoot him, hang him, and all that. And I said, well, we elected him President of the United States.
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Correct. And I was in the remains of one of those camps over there, and there was the cemetery, and all the people there in that camp primarily were young kids of 16 years old, thereabouts, or old people, which you would call old people for a war, guys in their 40s, and they all starved to death in the early days of July 1945. That's about how long it would take people to starve to death. And we've even got a DVD we sell where we interview a couple guys who were in such camps until they had a chance to get out. The guards, excuse me, the American guards were not the American fighting soldiers. Those guys had some honor. These were rear echelon guys who never got into the war, but were sent over to guard the camps. And some poor German soldier would be just sitting there talking to his buddies, and suddenly some clown with an M1 decided, well, let's see if I can hit a target. Bang, right between the eyes, or whatever, and he was dead. So, and that's all on that DVD we have.
All right, let me mention that terrible Polish Jew, Dwight D. Eisenhower. I think that's what it said in his West Point yearbook.
I don't know anything about that.
Well, he was also in charge of the troops that marched on the bonus army from World War I.
Oh yeah, I remember that part.
Yes, sir.
And I always have to chuckle whenever I see a picture of him standing with some of the other generals like Patton and Omar Bradley, etc., who've got ribbons from their breast pocket up and over their shoulders, and he's got about 4 little ribbons, which meant that he didn't get arrested or something like that. You know, he's a real joke. He was the aide-de-camp to MacArthur.
Yes.
And but he's, okay. The guy's dead. He was a horrible person, but what can I say? He was a war hero because we said so. The winners not only write the history, they write the definition of what's a war hero and what's a war criminal, and all the war heroes are on our side, the war criminals are on the other side.
Now, your area of expertise is, of course, the U-boats, but let me, I've been doing a lot of research on some other German technology that involved the shipping by U-boat of a few tons of mercury, that supposedly the mercury was used in anti-gravity craft developed by the Germans from a wreck of a UFO, I think it was in somewhere around 33.
Well, I don't know about UFOs and anti-gravity, but I do know U-boats did carry mercury quite frequently when they were going to Japan and back, because they used that for they traded stuff like that. Mercury, you got to have mercury if you're going to have cartridges and ammunition, because you got to have mercury fulminate for the primers. So it was not uncommon, but there's the old story that they used mercury for ballast. That's a lot of baloney. They used blocks of iron for ballast, and the new boats, the Type 21s, they had water ballast with pipes running fore and aft to where they could trim the boat quietly by just moving water fore and aft rather than running the trim pumps. But mercury for ballast never happened. A lot of times, sometimes they would put mercury in flasks down in the keel because that's the only place they could store them, and they did use it for ballast. And when they were carrying large sums of gold around too, they would use that for ballast sometimes too. But they did trade routes. They had long-range submarines that went back and forth to the South Pacific, to Jakarta, Batavia, Indonesia, etc., to the Japanese-held bases. And sometimes they'd meet the Japanese submarines in a fairly free, safe area. They would ship mercury, they would ship tin, they would ship quinine, they would ship all sorts of stuff that was badly needed. But how much can you carry on a U-boat? It's not going to make much of a dent in what you really need. But they did ship mercury around. But as for time travel, I don't know. That comes down to the what they call die Glock, the German or so-called Nazi bell. That's something else I'm not an expert on. Guys like Igor Witkowski and Joe Farrell, those guys are the ones that did the research on the bell.
The Germans obviously had technology, advanced technology. You mentioned something about the submarines. They had more advanced submarines. Now we've got atomic submarines, but it was the Germans that discovered the secrets of the atom, we might say. Oh yeah. That's in my book also. You know, when anybody says, why didn't they go after Hitler living in Argentina? So I throw it back at him and I say, well, who's they? Who do you mean by they? Oh, well, they stumble and stammer. Well, Israel. No, there was no such place as Israel in 1945. That's right.
The Mossad. Well, the Mossad, if it even existed at that time, was small. And then they say, well, how about the U.S.? Okay, I was a special weapons guy in the Air Force. Special weapons means hydrogen bombs, special weapons, thermonuclears, etc. And I went through 6 months intensive training, Lowry Air Force Base, January until June of 1958. And I remember the first week or two of the class, we had to watch movies about the American atomic weapons program. And we were struggling. We were struggling in the early days. Japan test fired their first weapon 1 week before we test fired our first device. That was in the book Japan's Secret War by Robert Wilcox, who's also a member of Shark Hunters. And so there was a scramble on to get fissionable material. So when the war ended and the surrender order came, the submarine U-234 was in the middle of the North Atlantic, and they came to the U.S. and surrendered. They had on board 2 Me-262 jet fighters in crates with all the technological data for the Japanese to start making these things. They had the whole General Air Force staff of General Ulrich Kessler going to Tokyo. They had a fleet judge who was on his way to Tokyo to have some traitors executed, and they had a lot of scientists. They also had 2 Japanese technicians, who were at the head of their field in weapons development, and one guy who became a member of Shark Hunters, Dr. Heinz Schlicke, who was the guy who designed the infrared trigger device for atom bombs, and they also had 560 kilos of uranium on board. So they surrendered in the United States. What happened to that uranium? Nobody knows. Where's the paper trail? What paper trail? We think it went to Japan from the airplane Enola Gay. We think it was dropped on Hiroshima. Incidentally, that's pronounced Hiroshima, not Hiroshima, like the lamestream press likes to call it. And all of a sudden, the American Special Weapons Program took off. All of a sudden, we had jet fighters. We had rockets. Germany had an intercontinental ballistic missile, the A-9 and 10, that was 6 months away from being able to hit New York City from over there, which is why Patton was pulled out of a major conflict and headed into Thuringia province, because that's where all the top secret stuff was going on of the Reich. The jet fighters were being built inside mountains and taken out, flown off a strip on top of the mountain. And the atomic program was over there. So Patton was told to get in there and secure it before the Russians could get there, which he did, and then the U.S. pulled out. But I think we had a bunch of stuff with us. When Werner von Braun came to this country, you know, the rocket superstar,
right?
He had 40 tons of documents. That's a lot of paper to be dragging around. But we think the deal was struck. The U.S. and the Allies would just forget about Adolf Hitler living down there in Argentina quietly, in exchange for all this equipment, technology, and scientists. Jesus, we got tons of scientists out of it. We've got a list of the scientists. I don't know how many pages it goes, but it's
Operation Paperclip.
Right, that was the Paperclip was only part of it. There was others, and so we've got a list of all these guys, their home address, what their specialty was, and how much money they were getting paid. Wow, some of them were getting paid $500 a month. Holy cow! But of course, at that time I joined the Air Force, I was only getting $78 a month. So yeah, it was a race to snatch up all the German technicians, the scientists, etc. They had the Me-262 jet fighter, they had a Heinkel jet fighter, they had the Arado AR-234 jet bomber, and the rocket plane, the Me-163 Comet, the guy who flew the first Comet in combat. Wolfgang Später, he was a member of Shark Hunters till he died. And we got all that stuff. The submarines, the Type 21s, that they never got into combat, but they had hundreds of them ready to go when they surrendered. That was the basis for the Russian Whiskey class, the French Daphne class. The Brits and the U.S. made submarines out of those, designed on that hull shape, etc.
If I'm not mistaken, Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo,
yep, Gestapo Müller,
was brought over to the United States, made a general over here.
That's what it seems to indicate. There was a guy named Gregory Douglas.
Yes, sir.
Who had he had been a member of Shark Hunters. You know, his name really is Peter Stahl.
I've read both of it. I read both of his books. Right.
His real name was Peter Stahl, and Gregory Douglas was his son's first and middle name. Gregory Stahl Douglas. Gregory Douglas Stahl. Anyhow, yeah, he wrote all about Gestapo Müller coming over here, and there was still a lot of controversy. But another one of our members, Clark McClelland, who was 35 years with NASA as an engineer, he was brought into the office of Dr. DeVos, who was the first head of NASA. He was one of the top German rocket scientists, and he was introduced to a couple guys in Dr. DeVos' office. One was Mr. Green, and that was the deck name, as they call it, the code name, the fake name for Heinrich Müller was Mr. Green or Dr. Green, Dr. Grün in German. And the other guy he met was the most mysterious guy of World War II, Hans Kammler. Now, nobody knows who Hans Kammler was. He was the third most powerful guy in the Reich, right behind Hitler and Bormann. He was in charge of all the secret projects, the super long-range transport planes, the Type 21 submarines, the nuclear weapons, the jet fighters. He was in charge of it all. And if you look up his history, there are two scenarios that they want you to believe. One, when the war ended, he walked into the woods and shot himself so that nobody could make him talk. Or two, his SS Guard detachment marched him into the woods and shot him so that nobody could make him talk. Then the SS Guards shot their SS commander. You know, none of this makes sense. And the third thing, they had three of these big monster long-range transports, the Focke-Wulf FW-390s. They were the same, but they were different. Each one was called they were called V1, V2, and V3, which was merely their designation. The V1 plane flew down around, I think, South Africa and back without refueling. The V3 was never completed and was just abandoned. The V2 was about 3 meters longer than the V1, which gave it increased fuel capacity. And they needed some props, so they took the props off of the V1 version, put them on the V2 version. That one was assigned to Kamler, and it disappeared right around the same time Kamler disappeared. So where did it go? Did it take Kamler? We're not sure. Our indication, and we've got charts and everything, that this Ju-390 flew down to Uruguay, and we're absolutely certain of it. One of our people has all the documents. It landed on a stretch of highway in Uruguay, about 15 kilometers long. There was a little woods nearby, and they put a radio beacon there so the guy could vector in. And as soon as the plane landed, it was taken apart and disposed of. The pilot of that plane was contacted by one of our, what we call SEAG agents at SEIG, Shark Hunters, Eagle Hunters Intelligence Group. Unlike any of the other researchers, we have members in 76 countries. Some of them are retired spooks, some of them are still working for various agencies in different countries, and others, like this one, we call him or her Pizarro, who has access to all the archives that the Stasi just abandoned and other personal archives. Talked to many of the veterans who actually were there. And as I say, Pizarro went down to Uruguay and was talking with the pilot of this Ju-390. So the idea of escape to South America is not only possible or probable, it's fact. It is absolute fact.
Could this be the reason the Bush family bought all that land in Uruguay?
Oh, I don't know. I've heard that story, but I think anybody who bought land down there bought it because it was cheap. Ted Turner, we understand, bought a couple of ranches down there that cover hundreds of square miles, and was partitioning it off and selling it to some of the Hollywood guys for their ranches down there. These people have tons and tons of money, and the Yankee dollar is powerful. Right now, I think it's about 10 Argentine pesos to the Yankee dollar. So if you're a multi-zillionaire, you know, why not buy a ranch down in Argentina where if it costs 10 million pesos, you can get it for $1 million, and $1 million is pocket change to some of these people.
Well, if you print your own money, pretty soon you can buy up the whole neighborhood.
Yeah, well, that's true too.
Now, let me ask you a couple of things. One, what about the fascist and Nazi plot with George Bush's father, Prescott Bush, and General Smedley Butler, who blew whistle on the idea of starting the fascism here, supposedly?
I am not an expert on that. I've heard the stories, but beyond that, I'm not, like I say, I'm not an expert.
Okay.
I duck back into my area of expertise. When it comes to the U-boats, and I'm not bragging, this is fact, there's only 4 guys in the entire world that know it better than I do. I do this 12 hours a day. I walked off a very high-paid job, making a few grand a week as a vice president of a company to do this at no salary. But I do it 12 hours a day, every day. I've got contacts all through friends, all through Germany and dozens and dozens of countries. So U-boats, I'm an expert. There's only 4 guys know it better than I do. 2 of them are former U-boat officers. 2 of them are sons of U-boaters who were killed. And when it comes to the escape of Hitler to Argentina, I can't think of anybody in the whole world that knows it better than I do, because we've dug it out. It was one of my guys who went to the National Archives 5, 6, 7 years ago, and darn near lived there for a while, finding all these dusty old boxes that the archivists didn't even know they had, finding all these FBI files, CIA files that flat out state Hitler got away, and they knew it. He got them all declassified, which they're now they're now available to anybody online. But we've got those files, some of them in the book. I mean, you can't put hundreds and hundreds of files in the book. We've got letters in the book from Don Angel, Alcazar de Velasco, and there's no question about that. So my two areas of expertise are U-boats and Hitler's escape. Beyond that, Prescott Bush, I've heard the rumors and stories. I don't know. Same with why did he buy? I thought he had bought George Bush. I thought he bought property in Argentina rather than Uruguay, but it doesn't really matter. I don't know what the Uruguayan peso is compared to the Yankee dollar, but the Argentine peso is pretty soft. So,
all right.
If I had the money, I'd buy some too down there.
What are we looking at now? I mean, if I'm just the old maxim is running through my head. Those who don't learn from history are bound to repeat it. And
yeah, that's a handy little idiom. But if that held true, then once Cain killed Abel, nobody would murder anybody anymore if you learn from your mistakes. But apparently we haven't learned from that. People are still killing each other.
That's right.
There's still people having wars.
Well, what are we looking for here? What I feel like we are the America is being set up with these illegal or wars based on lies. We are being set up to possibly do the same thing to Americans that was done to Germans. Is that a reasonable assumption, or?
Well, if you look at the reality, the United States as well as most of Europe, they are indeed being infused with tons of asylum seekers, they call it. These are people who claim that their life is in danger in their own country, which I think means they actually have to work in their own country. But they come into the various countries of Europe. They get free housing, they get welfare, the same as here. And they don't have to work. They get free college, and they're having babies 10 times faster than the indigenous people. I had a friend who was a very powerful political leader in Austria, and in 2008, September, he and his party won a much, much bigger victory than was predicted, and his signs and everything was Austria for the Austrians. So after he won in September of 2008, he quickly arranged a meeting with the head of the other right-wing party, and between the two of them, he came out and proclaimed on television that he was going to take Austria out of the EU. He was going to get rid of the euro and go back onto the Austrian shilling, and he was going to kick out all the freeloaders. He didn't live 3 weeks after the election, and he had a one-car crash all by himself. The guy was so incredibly wealthy, he couldn't be bought off, so.
Now, Kennedy tried to do the same thing. Kennedy issued United States dollars.
Yeah, I know. The three things that got him whacked, in my opinion, and again, I'm no expert on this, he said he was going back onto the U.S. gold-backed currency, get rid of the Federal Reserve. He said he was going to prevent Israel from getting nuclear weapons, and he was going to disband the CIA. Well, he might as well have walked in front of a bus at that time.
Yes, sir. And
then his brother gets up. Really didn't make any sense. The guy must have been dumber than a box of rocks. He says, when I'm president, I know who killed my brother, and when I'm president, I'm going to tell the world. Yeah, right. Well, here, take a shortcut through the kitchen here, Bobby.
Right.
That didn't last. All four of the Kennedy brothers, in my opinion, and I'm no expert on this, but in my opinion, all four of them were set up for assassinations. The one attempt on Teddy didn't work too well. That plane he was in fell out of the sky. The other three guys were killed. Teddy wound up with a broken back, but in my opinion, I think somebody was trying to whack him.
And John F. Jr., they took him right out, too.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Now,
it's kind of, the higher you get on the food chain, you better get more and more powerful rather than more and more argumentative, because the powerful people can whack the argumentative people. And I'm not saying it happened that way, but I'm saying it is a possibility.
Well, it's certainly what happened to me. I mean, not only did they try to kill me, I had some of my magazines sold for $500,000, and I still retained 50% of it.
Yeah.
That was, we signed the deal on Thursday. They put a press release out in Wall Street on Friday, and Monday I walked in the office, the CEO was white and shaking. Can't go through with a deal, Clay. I can't. They've contacted every stockholder in the company. They're trying to impeach me from my own company here.
Yeah, when you can print your own money, you can pretty well afford to hire anybody you want.
I got involved with a presidential campaign in 1996. Charles Collins, nice guy, Rhodes Scholar. He was the first Republican to sign up for the race in '96, and I traveled with him from coast to coast. Every time he got up on stage to tell the Republican Party we could buy back the Federal Reserve, wipe out a $6 trillion then. Now it's 16.
Yeah. Almost, it's over 17 now.
And every time he got up to speak, every camera on stage, CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS, was turned off and pointed at the ground, and all the cameramen took a smoke break.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Well,
in 2 states, they unplugged his microphone.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So,
well,
I mean, what do? We can't vote. We can't vote because the media only tells you about the people that they hire or they bought off. The media only tells you. They don't tell you about the independents. They only tell you about the two parties. We spent $1 billion. We donated. The American people donated $1 billion to the Republicans and Democrats. And what did we have a choice in between, McCain and Obama?
Yeah, that's a heck of a choice, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
I don't donate to any of partly because I'm broke. I've been Obamanized, and partly because I'd rather. You're voting for the lesser of the two headaches.
Right, and the lesser of two evils, still evil.
Yeah, but again, like I say, I bury myself into this research, and I have a lot of fun at it. Don't make any money at it. Like I say, the only person, we got about 12.5 people on the masthead of shark hunters, and the only one who gets a salary is my wife, she runs the office. She gets $200 a week. She was an executive with Lord & Taylor, making a hell of a lot more than that. But to run Shark Hunter's office, she gets $200 a week. I don't get a dime salary. The secretary gets nothing. Nobody gets nothing. They're all volunteers. But I've never had so much fun in my life. Back when I was vice president of a large company, making $2,000-3,000 a week, it was a job. I come in late, go home early, give orders, take long lunches. And make a lot of money, but it wasn't a lot of fun. This is so much fun, which is why at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm in my office, and I work until about 4 in the afternoon, and then I go back after one TV show, and I work from about 6 until 7.
All right, I'm trying to, sorry folks, we've had evidently power difficulties in Napomo, California. And my guest today is Harry Cooper of Shark Hunters. So for you folks at Truth Radio, if you go to freeamerican.com, not only there's links there to this show, and if you go to Facebook, Free America 69, there's links to this show. And you'll be at one of those places, you'll be able to hear the whole thing. The whole interview is up on Blog Talk Radio. It will also be up on YouTube, Free America 69. And I highly recommend that you get this and forward it. And Harry, the same thing with you. You can go to Blog Talk and save it for your default player. That'll give you the MP3 file of this show.
Excellent.
And I would appreciate it if you'd put it up on the Shark Hunters. Now, folks, they don't like me very much because I bring you guests like this. I bring you information like this. And again, I'm not promoting anybody. I'm not saying, oh, join the neo-Nazis. I wouldn't join a neo-Nazi anymore, and I'd join a neocon. These are people that the people that you're listening to on your radio or your television are owned. They're controlled. They make the big bucks. I'll never forget. I interviewed Pat Buchanan back when he was running for president, and I said, Pat, you know, how could you do that show Crossfire with Bill Press and not get up and walk around that desk and slap the tar out of him? How could you do that? He said, well, Clay, Ted Turner paid me a lot of money not to. I said, well, thank you, Pat Buchanan. You've answered all of the rest of my questions. Thank you very much. Nice to have had you on my show.
Yeah, I wish I could get somebody to pay me a bunch of money not to do anything.
That's right. You know, this is propaganda, and you know, the Hitler's people were pretty good at that. They knew about it, but most of the propaganda that we're seeing right now comes from our television. I try to tell people, look, they don't call television programming for nothing.
Yeah, well, back when I was a kid and it first came out, they called it the boob tube.
That's probably still a good term for it.
Or the idiot box.
Or Talmud Vision.
Yeah. Well, I never heard that one before, but and I remember when we used to get 3 networks and that was it. Oh, plus WGN in Chicago. When my little girl here, well, when she was 8 years old, she's 23 now, just graduated with a degree in psychology with many honors. But when she was 8, she wanted a TV set in her own room. I said, come on, we got 3 TV sets in the house. And I said, when I was your age, we didn't even have TV sets in the house. And she says, what, was Grammy and Grandpa that poor? I said, no, wasn't even invented yet. Kind of hard to fathom that. But, of course, I was 52 when my daughter was born. So, you know, there's a couple of generations in between there. You mean you didn't have TV? I said, no. And she said, well, you had your Walkman, didn't you? And I said, no, we didn't even have stereo. And she said, what's that? So I had to go back and explain, you know, what happened in 50 years.
Try to explain what a transistor radio was?
Yeah, and a portable radio. I told her a portable record player. Well, she loves what they call vinyls now, which is the 33 1/3 RPM records. She's got, well, my collection and my wife's collection we gave to her, and she bought more. She got about 500 or 600 LPs, but and she's got a turntable, etc. And I showed her a picture of what a portable record player looked like back in the 50s, as opposed to a CD player now. Holy smoke, you know. She said, that's portable? I said, yeah, and you had to find a place to plug it in, too, because it didn't work without a plug-in.
Yeah, it's pretty. Somebody one time said the problem we'll have in the future is trying to figure out how to listen to these records, listen to these DVDs, because everything will be on a chip somewhere, and you know, you'll have a whole new industry there trying to.
Heck yes. I went, you know, just before I went to Argentina this last time, I decided instead of taking just a snapshot camera, I would also take a camcorder. And I hadn't bought a camcorder in probably 10 years. So stupid me, I go to the local video store, and okay, I want to buy a camcorder. Okay, the thing's about the size of an old cigarette case. I said, what in the hell is this? Where do you put the tape? Well, there ain't no tape. You put in a chip. So here I am. I got all these chips sitting around. They're about the size of your thumbnail, and they carry incredible amounts of data on them, and also videos and snapshots. And I was videotaping this one fella down in La Falda, Argentina, some months ago, and I noticed that, you know, I just had the video camera set, and while he was telling it, this guy had incredible knowledge of what went on back in the 40s and 50s, with all the guys from the Reich coming over. But every so often I'd see a little yellow square form around his head, and so I got home to look at it. Yeah, the camera just automatically takes portraits, snapshots of people while it's recording the video. And I thought, oh, geez, you got to be a computer engineer to run the damn thing. But anyhow, like I say, we got so much information in the book, Hitler in Argentina, to prove without any doubt whatsoever he did indeed make it down there. And also, since January, I've come up with a ton of more information, which we'll be publishing again in another year, maybe in another book. But there's no question about it. We found where the ruins of this lodge way up in Mendoza province, which was a thriving ski lodge back in the 30s and 40s. And this is where young Juan Perón would go to meet with German agents. They were setting it up way back then. So anybody who thinks Hitler popped himself in the bunker in April of 1945, they also put out cookies and milk on Christmas Eve for a fat guy with a red suit coming down their chimney with a bag full of toys. Because there's no way Hitler popped himself. Oh, and I see on the internet now some guy is selling what he claims is a piece of the bloody sofa cover soaked with Hitler's blood. Jesus. How about this bridge I got for sale in New York City?
Now, what kind of... Let's here assume that you're absolutely correct on this, and Hitler did live and survive. Now, did he retire peacefully, making love to Eva up there in the mountains in the Andes? What was his influence? I mean, you know, even John F. Kennedy said this, that Hitler was probably one of the most important figures in our world, in the history of this world. What kind of influence did he have while he was alive?
Whether he retired to make love to Eva, I have no idea, but he maintained a very low profile. I don't think he had anything to do with much of anything. Bormann was the power behind the throne. Bormann had him move down to South America as the figurehead, but then things changed. Everything went quiet, went underground. But every 20th of April, which was Hitler's birthday, they had big celebrations down there in Bariloche and many other small towns. A lot of those pictures are on my website, sharkhunters.com, and then click on previous tours over there on the left margin. But there's a whole bunch more that's not on the website that I send to our members in the monthly magazine, and also more stuff in this book, and even more stuff that we're ready to come out with. And like I say, it's just amazing that up in the northern hemisphere, we're the only people that didn't know this. Almost everybody I talked to, except for the young people down there, anybody I talked to, they knew Hitler lived down there until he died. And they wonder what the hell's the matter with us? We don't know this. So, and I remember towards 1944, there was a big push by the U.S. To bring South America into the Allies. There was a movie that Disney made called Three Amigos. There were two of them. I don't remember what the other movie was, but they starred three cartoon characters. One was Donald Duck, one was, I think it was Goofy, and the other one was a brightly colored parrot named Jose Carioca from down in South America. And it just showed what good friends North America and South America were, and how they were against these evil Germans and all that stuff. So, the propaganda was coming from everywhere. And the American people, for the best part today, the American people think Hitler was this horrible guy. They think Germany was going to attack the United States and overthrow the United States, which is ludicrous. He had no intention of invading the U.S. He had no way to do it unless he had a fleet of rowboats. He didn't have any transports. He didn't have any long-range planes. He had he kept sending peace proposals to England, which Churchill spiked.
What about Hess? I mean, didn't he went there to try to form a peace, and they arrested Hess, didn't they?
That's correct. He, one of our members, a guy named Charles Hyam, who was a highly, highly respected researcher, writer. He wrote many books that are well received and well respected. Charles Hyam. He was doing the story on Hess, Rudolph Hess, flying over. He was supposed to land parachute onto the property, the estate of the Duke of some darn thing or another, who was cousin to the king, because Churchill had already rejected about 20 different peace proposals that Hitler had sent over. And so they figured if he went right to the king, he might get something done. So the last time I talked to Charles Hyam, he had gotten a lot accomplished for this book, and he was just about to come out with the book, and doggone it, one morning he woke up dead. And where's his book? Nobody seems to know what happened to all his work. Don't you just hate it when you wake up dead?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's what happened to Charles Hyam.
There's
no question Rudolph Hess was on a peace mission. No question that he was whacked by Britain. And we ran a story about that in our magazine some time ago. And another story we ran several years ago, his plane was spotted coming over the British coast at night. They didn't know who he was. The coastal defense didn't. And they scrambled 2 fighters to go up. And they were just pulling in on his tail, and were just about to push the button and send him out of the sky, and they got the radio from ground control aboard. They realized this was Rudolph Hess, and they didn't want to shoot him down any old place. They wanted to get him where they had people stationed to grab him. And then I remember all those years, the United States, the Brits, and the French all wanted to release him from Spandau prison, but those nasty old Soviets wouldn't let him go. So finally the Soviets said, okay, we're done with this guy, get rid of him. Well, you would think it would be simple. You walk in, you turn the key, you tell them there's the door, hit the trail. No, they had to go through all sorts of baloney. It was going to take weeks before they could release him. In the meantime, this old man with arthritis that couldn't even raise his arms up to his shoulder level, he was so excited about getting out, he took a lamp cord and tied it to a beam over his head and hanged himself. Hard to figure.
Sure he did, just like James Forrestal jumping out of a 13th floor of the Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Yeah, right. Well, maybe he thought he was Superman. Who knows?
What do we? How do we go? Where do we go from here? We've got the history. You're providing the history. We are, and we've got a technology now. We've got technology that they didn't have 50 years ago. I've done stories in my last issue of my Free American magazine about the GMO foods, how they're trying to poison us, how they're we've done stories about the chemtrails, again spraying us with aluminum, and having to put signs up on Mount Rainier, Mount Shasta, don't eat the white snow either. And we're our GMO foods that the rats won't eat are being produced by Monsanto, the same people that produce all of our insecticides, all of our weed killers, and Agent Orange. It's like they are trying to kill the American people, trying to reduce the population. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? If our own governments are doing this, and nobody's forcing these chemtrail planes down, if we can't, who do we turn to? What do we do as a people, as a country? I mean, I've been accused of being anti-government, Harry, but I said I'm the most pro-government guy you want. I just want the republic guaranteed us by the Constitution. As Benjamin Franklin said, what form of government have you wrought for us, folks, sir? A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. And Franklin also told us what a democracy was. That's 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner.
Yeah, right, I heard that one.
So what do we do? What do we do, Harry? I mean, I'm doing everything I can, and all I seem to get is harassment. And
what do we do? Again, I duck back under the cover that I'm not an expert on that. If it comes to U-boats or Hitler escaping, I'm the guy. When it comes to this other stuff, I'm as much in the dark as anybody. What do we do? I don't know. Ride it out. Wouldn't bother me so much because I'm an old fart of 75, but I've got two young kids, a 26-year-old special needs son and a 23-year-old daughter who's incredibly beautiful and very bright, and she's going on for her doctorate in psychology. So I worry about them. But like I keep telling them, if the shit ever hits the fan, I can speak enough German to get along when we move to Argentina. Good food down there.
I believe that, and still got their great cattle ranches and range-fed beef, huh?
Yeah, and great beef. And Buenos Aires is a beautiful city, very cosmopolitan. They call it the Paris of the South, and you know, it's old world charm, but it's modern. So, and then, you know, if a house costs $300,000 down there, if you got 30,000 Yankee dollars, you're in business. And they got some beautiful homes down there. It's just it's a very nice place. Of course, I'm an American. I love this country more than any. But you know, going down there for expeditions, for research, I love it. It's great. And the people everybody I've met down there has been super nice. And they don't drive too crazy. It ain't like driving in Rome or Paris where you take your life in your hands. So, I don't know. I think we're not far away from a major course change or an uprising or God knows what it is. Maybe, who knows? Maybe there's a fire and a flood coming next time. I should start building an ark, huh?
Well, God promised us He wouldn't do that again, but if the sun, we get a flare or somebody sets off a little nuke like they did in New York at a certain altitude, we've got EMP radiation that could kill every form of communication we got right now. This radio show we're doing, this internet that we've got, this connection. You know, and I think there's really hope on the horizon. The U.S. Navy has discovered they don't have to buy oil from the Rockefellers or BP. They can just scoop up, re-outfit their ships, and run them off the water they float on.
Wow. Our military is a great military which has fantastic traditions. But unfortunately, this administration is so anti-military. You know, I travel sometimes to military bases all over. And the United States military is just incredible. They've got tremendous history, the technology, their honor. It's all fantastic. But, you know, I wonder what it would be like joining the military today. I joined the military when everybody looked up to the military, and if you didn't join the military, people thought you were some kind of a coward or gay. But now, you know, you got to really want to join the military because the government is not your friend. So.
And if you're gay, you get promoted. If you're not, you don't.
Yeah, I know.
What about just how do you feel about this Bergdahl thing? Here we're trading them for the Taliban. Now, I'm not taking the position that you know, I'm not pro-Taliban, but I also believe and know that those nasty old that we went to war with those nasty old Taliban because they were destroying the opium poppy crops.
Yeah, well, I don't understand why we ever went to war in Afghanistan, because when the Russians were at war in Afghanistan, we were laughing because they were getting their ass kicked, and it was obvious to everybody you can't win a war in that kind of terrain unless you have all-out war and you do carpet bombing and kill everything in sight. But if you do this limited war, you can't win. And we saw the Russians, they got their ass kicked over there, so next thing we know, we're in there. It makes no sense. But
we're there, and our troops are protecting the opium poppy crops that has been restored since we invaded.
Now, I don't know anything about that. Like I say, I'm not an expert there. But as for the exchange, to the best of my knowledge, our country has never, ever, ever negotiated with terrorists. But then again, remember, prior to this clown in the White House, no American president has ever bowed before a foreign dignitary. And some bitch should have been thrown out of office right then. But what can I say? We're stuck with him. And even if the Congress impeached him, you still got to go through the Senate for conviction, and the Senate is so strongly Democrat, and nobody votes the American way anymore. They vote their party way, and that's counterproductive.
Yeah, maybe the only hope we got is Jesse Ventura. If he ran and he would and ran on an independent ticket, he'd be the first president since George Washington didn't belong to the Republicans or Democrats.
I know. I bet you can't tell me who was the oldest man to ever run for the presidency of the United States. He didn't win, but he ran. Who was the oldest one?
I don't know.
You'll never get it. It was my great-great-grandfather's uncle, Peter Cooper. He ran on the Greenback Party, and he didn't win, but it was one of the established parties that did win. Yeah, you're right. This country is set up for the two-party system, and a third party ain't going to make it. But whether that's good or bad, I don't know. I didn't do well in my civics classes. But again, you know, I go back to this Hitler in Argentina. He was there. He helped build Perón to be the president, but unfortunately for the Argentine people, Juan Perón and Evita were so liberal they gave away all sorts of money, and the economy in Argentina right now is pretty shabby. And for the longest time, this is kind of like parallel in Germany, for the longest time, it was against the law in Argentina to praise Juan Perón or to have his name in public or anything. Now the Peronistas are the biggest party down in Argentina, and they're building monuments to Juan Perón. And Evita was a pretty sharp chick. She went on her rainbow tour to Europe to meet all the important people, but also her Secret Service was finding all these alleged war criminals before the Allies were and saying, hey, look, they're only about 2 weeks from catching you. Why don't you go to Argentina? Cross my palm here and give me lots of money. And away you go. Another interesting thing, down there the upper crust are not embalmed and buried, but they're treated by a taxidermist and stuffed like, you know, a deer you shot on vacation or something. So they look the same 20 years from now as the day they died. And somebody broke into Juan Perón's tomb in 1987 and chopped off his hands. Now, why would anybody steal somebody's hands? Maybe you'd need the fingerprints to get into bank accounts. So,
could be. Could be.
Yeah, so the political situation down there paralleled Germany for a while. Like I say, it was against the law to mention Perón's name, to do anything for, you know, to praise Perón. Just like in Germany now, God forbid you say anything good about Hitler or the party. You cannot show a swastika in public. And at this memorial service I go to every September, some of the guys from the Waffen-SS come with, well, everybody brings huge, big wreaths to commemorate the men who died. And if the Waffen-SS guys come with the black and silver cloth on their flowers and stuff, if it has the SS sig runes on them, the police come in and cut them off. It's just stupid.
Let me ask you about this. I've had friends of mine that were kidnapped here in America, sent to Canada, and extradited to Germany for denying the Holocaust. Now, if they point out that there wasn't 6 million Jews in Germany at the time of World War II, suddenly that's a criminal offense. And
it is. I take it you're talking about Ernst Zundel.
Ernst Zundel, yes.
Yeah, he was a member of shark hunters until he wound up in trouble. Now it's against the law to even question the Holocaust. To deny it has been a crime for a long time, but now to question it is a crime. So when you go over to Germany, you gotta watch what you say. There's certain songs that you pick up when you go to prison. if they catch you raising your right arm in public, especially at the old certain rights places, it's a fine of 2,500 euros, which is about 3,200 Yankee dollars. So, you know, but I keep thinking of that scene in Star Wars where Princess Leia tells the bad guy, the more you tighten your grasp, the more star systems you live. So now the grandchildren of the guys who fought in the war, they're getting tired of this stuff. They didn't do anything wrong, right or anything. They're tired of paying, because they're paying reparations still. They just got done paying reparations for World War I. And they're tired of all this guilt heaped on them when they didn't do anything themselves, and they want to learn their own history, which is why I'm supposed to meet with a German publisher shortly. He wants the rights to translate my book into German and publish in Germany. We're just about to ink a deal with a French publisher to translate the book into French and publish it there. We've just gone on to Kindle. What else? What's that big book chain?
Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Noble, yeah, Barnes and Chernobyl. Yeah, they're selling our book. So it's in April and May. It was the #1 best-selling book in its category with Amazon. And so your listeners can go to sharkhunters.com, look under books, and there it is. And like I say, if they send me an email, sharkhunters@earthlink.net, tell me they heard this show and they want the current issue of our magazine electronically, we'll just push the button and it'll reappear on their computer, no charge.
All right, Harry, if you go to my website, click on your name or right-click on your name, you can get the URL for the show. All you got to do is save it for your default player. That'll save it as an MP3 file on your computer. And folks, if you go to freeamerican.com, you can see the documentary on the greatest story never told. Listen to this show and share it with people. We're not trying to, well, actually I am trying to change the world. I am trying to set the world free. And there are a lot of different areas that I talk about that Harry doesn't. I talk about the war on drugs. I talk about the war on terror, being a war against anyone, anywhere that wants to go against the one world government of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers. I talk about the war on drugs because anytime a man with a badge can walk up and say, "What's that in your pocket?" Whoa, you're going to go to jail and work for IBM. You live in a police state.
Well, I'm pretty easy on that. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I never have anything in my pocket. I've never done drugs in my whole life. I don't carry a weapon, and thanks to Obama, I don't even have money in my pocket anymore.
Well, I think I do all of the above, Harry. And I ride a Harley, and I am an old biker, and you don't want to say anything about veterans around me that's detrimental, because I will hurt you. And
what branch were you in?
I joined the U.S. Army, RA 18691-506.
I was Air Force, AF 16590-591.
Isn't it amazing we can remember that? What happened to the Alzheimer's? I mean, oops.
Hey, you couldn't get paid unless you had your serial number.
That's right. That's right.
You guys in the Army got paid in cash, though, didn't you?
Well, frankly, I don't remember. They tried to kill me. I volunteered for Vietnam. I volunteered for Special Forces. I volunteered for Airborne. But they tried to kill me before I ever got there. Caught spinal meningitis in Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Sure glad I didn't join the Army.
Oh boy, it was. I had a black sergeant, didn't think I was sick, wanted to march me around while I was being paralyzed, show me all the trains I was going to dig when I got back off sick call. I never got back off sick call.
Well, when I got at the end of my 4-year hitch in the Air Force, when they said they'd never make me a pilot because we had too many left over from World War II in Korea, I got out, and then we started. That was summer of '61, and we started hearing about the Green Berets. So I went running down to my local Army recruiter, and I said, I want to join up, because if you sign up within 90 days, you keep your rank, and I was a staff. And so I said, I want to be a Green Beret. And the guy says, you got to be tough. I said, I got a black belt in judo. He says, we'll teach you weapons. I said, that's what I did in the Air Force, weapons and demolition. And he said, we'll teach you to jump out of airplanes. I said, okay, I can do that. And he says, you may have to kill women and children. I said, I don't care, they're commies, they got to die. And then he says, we'll teach you survival. And I said, what's that? And then he explained it. I says, well, I can blow up women and children. If they're commies, it doesn't matter. I can jump out of airplanes, but I'm not eating bugs and snakes for nobody.
All right, we're out of time. God bless you all. Thank you, Harry. I'll have you back here as soon as possible.
You know the phone number. Take care, man.
All right,
Good
sir.
being on your show.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.
The truth be revealed or concealed. A right-natured object, the truth, the truth to be revealed. But that depends upon what the truth is